The black SUV glided through the iron gates of a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Seoul. This wasn't the Blue House, not yet. It was a high-security safe house, a fortress of granite and glass hidden behind a forest of weeping willows. The door was opened by a man in a tactical vest, and Bertha stepped out, her legs feeling like they were made of water. Seung-yun was right behind her, his hand hovering near the small of her back, not touching, but guiding. The moment the heavy oak front door clicked shut, the silence of the house felt like a physical weight. The grandeur, the Ming vases, the silk-covered walls, the sheer expensiveness of the air, snapped something inside her. Bertha spun around, her suitcase thudding onto the marble floor. "Are you out of your mind?" Her voice boomed, the southern drawl thick and jagged with adrenaline. "You grounded the planes. You paraded me in front of every camera in Asia. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Seung-yun reached out, his face pleading. "Bertha, please, I had to stop you." "You didn't stop me. You kidnapped my life," she screamed, her hands gesturing wildly at the opulent room. "Look at this place. Look at you. You're talking about destiny and nations, and I'm just trying to remember if I turned off the gas in my 2-bedroom apartment." She marched up to him, poking a finger into the expensive silk of his chest. "I am a 50-year-old black woman from Georgia, Seung-yun. I have a life that makes sense, and I have a past that already told me I wasn't enough for a lawyer in Savannah. I am not a Korean queen. I don't fit in your palace. I don't speak your language, and your people are going to look at me like I'm a stain on your shiny new floor." Seung-yun stood his ground. He didn't flinch at her finger or her volume. In fact, as she yelled, the presidential mask began to slip, revealing the hollowed-out, lonely man from the roof garden. "Are you finished?" he asked softly. "No, I am not." "Good," he interrupted, stepping closer until their shadows merged on the marble. "Because you are right. You are not a Korean queen. You are not a political asset. You are the woman who tells me I'm a mess when I'm being a mess. You are the woman who made me eat soup when I was too tired to eat." He grabbed her hands, his grip desperate. "Bertha, look at me. Not the posters, not the motorcade. Look at me." She tried to look away, but his gaze was an anchor. "Everyone out there," he gestured toward the door, "sees a president. My family sees a legacy. My party sees a tool. My enemies see a target. I have spent 45 years being seen as everything except a human being." His voice broke, a rare tremor of vulnerability. "You are the only person on this entire planet who sees Seung-yun. You're the only one who treats me like a normal guy. And if I lose that, if I lose the one person who knows what I look like when I'm eating ramen on a plastic crate, then I really am just a ghost in a suit." Bertha's chest heaved, her anger hitting a wall of pure, raw empathy. She saw the truth in his eyes, the terrifying isolation of the crown. He wasn't just asking her to be his first lady. He was asking her to be his heartbeat. "You're a fool, Seung-yun," she whispered, her voice finally softening. "A powerful, reckless, beautiful fool." "I know," he said, leaning his forehead against hers. "But I'm your fool. Please, stay. No cameras, no agents, just us." For a moment, the safe house felt a little less like a fortress and a little more like a home. The morning didn't bring the smell of coffee. It brought the cold blue light of a smartphone screen. Seung-yun had gone to a pre-dawn meeting with his transition team, leaving Bertha in the vast, silent bedroom of the safe house. When she finally reached for her phone, she found her private world had been incinerated. Someone, a passerby, a disgruntled clerk, or perhaps a shadow from the security detail, had uploaded a burst of high-resolution photos to a popular Korean forum. It was their ramen date. In the first photo, Bertha was laughing, a piece of yellow radish held up on a chopstick. In the second, Seung-yun was leaning toward her, his eyes closed, looking more relaxed than the public had ever seen him. But the third was the money shot. Bertha reaching out to wipe a smudge of broth from the future president's lip. The images had bypassed the news cycles and gone straight into the veins of the internet. By the time Bertha scrolled down, there were 10,000 comments. Who is this woman? She looks like his mother. No, his auntie, Ajuma. Is this a joke? He's the face of our nation and he's eating on a crate with a foreigner? She's too old. Look at her skin. Look at her hair. This isn't the First Lady of Korea. This is a disaster for our international image. He must have been bewitched. This is a stain on the Blue House. The word Ajuma, a term that could be respectful but was being used here like a slur for old, unrefined woman, repeated like a heartbeat. Bertha sat on the edge of the silk-sheeted bed, her thumb trembling as she translated the comments. The relic comments from Savannah had returned. Only this time, they were written in a language she didn't speak, by millions of people she had never met. The war room. Below stairs, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the sharp, clipped tones of men who had spent their lives protecting the status quo. 4 elders, party chairmen, and kingmakers with silver hair and iron hearts sat across from Seung-hyun. On the table lay a printed stack of the netizens' comments. She is a liability, Seung-hyun Ah, the oldest man, Chairman Park said, tapping the photo of Bertha. We have spent 30 years building your image. You are the Prince of the Republic. You cannot be seen with a foreign woman of her vintage. She has a name, Seung-hyun said, his voice dangerously quiet. Her name is Bertha. Her name is the end of your career if you don't act now, Park snapped. The public is calling her his black auntie. They are mocking the dignity of the office. The opposition is already preparing a statement about your lack of judgment. She gave me strength when I was failing, Seung-hyun countered, leaning forward. She is my peace. I will not hide her. The elders exchanged looks of pity. We are not asking you to hide her. We are telling you to remove her. Give her a settlement, a generous one, a consulting fee for her time. Send her back to America with enough money to buy 10 houses. But if she is around on Inauguration Day, the party will withdraw its support for your cabinet. You will be a king without a kingdom. Seung-hyun stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. Then I will rule from the rubble. We are done here. Seung-hyun found Bertha in the kitchen. She wasn't crying. She was standing at the counter, methodically making a cup of tea, her face a mask of Savannah granite. I saw them, she said before he could speak. The auntie comments, the ones calling me a housekeeper, the ones saying I don't fit the Korean aesthetic. Seung-hyun moved to touch her, but she stepped back. They're right, Seung-hyun, she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. I look at those photos, and I don't see a first lady. I see a woman who wandered into the wrong movie. I'm a 50-year-old black woman. I'm too loud, too dark, and too old for this story. Your people don't want me. And for the first time in my life, I think I agree with them. Bertha, listen to me. No, you listen. She pointed to the TV in the corner, where News Crawl was showing a poll. 72% of voters believe the president's personal life is concerning. You wanted to be the president. You wanted to save this country. You can't do that if I'm the weight that sinks your ship. She looked at him with a love so fierce it was a sacrifice. They want you to dump me, Seung-hyun, and for your sake, I think you should. But Seung-hyun is not having it. The safe house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a staging ground. At 6 a.m., a van pulled into the driveway, and a team of 6 stylists marched into the drawing room like an invading army. They carried garment bags, heavy trunks of cosmetics, and an air of palpable disdain. Seung-hyun stood by the window, his arms crossed. Make her look like the woman I see, he commanded, not the woman the polls want. The lead stylist, a young man with a razor-thin mustache named Jisuk, looked Bertha up and down. He didn't see a woman. He saw a problem to be solved. The contrast is too high. Jisok whispered to his assistant. The public is already calling her dark. We need to brighten her. Bring the whitening base. We'll go 3 shades up to neutralize the undertones. Bertha sat in the velvet chair, watching through the mirror as they opened a jar of thick, pale cream. As Jisok reached for her face with a sponge, Bertha's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with the strength of a woman who had spent years building her own life. The room went dead silent. Put that down, Bertha said, her voice a low southern rumble. Ms. Brown, we are trying to make you palatable for the cameras, Jisok stammered. The lighting at the press conference is very harsh on... I said, put it down. Bertha stood up, towering over the stylist. I spent 50 years in my skin. I've survived Georgia sun and Savannah salt. You aren't going to paint me like a ghost just so some people on the internet feel comfortable. I am black. If your palatable means erasing me, then you've already failed. Seung-hyun suppressed a smile. Jisok looked at the president-elect for help, but Seung-hyun just raised an eyebrow. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open. A tiny, silver-haired woman walked in, leaning on a cane topped with a jade dragon. This was Madame Cho, the legendary designer who had dressed 3 generations of first ladies. The younger stylists bowed so low their foreheads nearly hit the floor. Madame Cho ignored them. She walked straight up to Bertha. She didn't look at the skin tone. She looked at the bone structure, the depth of the eyes, and the way Bertha held her shoulders, unbowed and regal. Idiots! Madame Cho croaked, gesturing to the whitening creams. You try to paint a diamond with house paint? Out! All of you! She shooed the younger team away and turned back to Bertha. Her old, wrinkled hand reached out and touched Bertha's cheek. You have the aura of a mountain, the old woman whispered in Korean. Seung-hyun translating with a catch in his voice. Strong. Ancient. Silver does not belong on you. You belong in the colors of the high Joseon court. Madame Cho snapped her fingers. Her personal assistants brought forward a box wrapped in cedar. Inside was a custom-made hanbok, but it wasn't the pastel pinks or soft blues common in modern weddings. It was a deep, bruised purple, the color of twilight and royalty, made of heavy, luminous silk. Purple is the color of the crown, Madame Cho said, and for your skin, we use the gold of the earth. 2 hours later, the transformation was complete. They hadn't touched her skin with bleach. They had oiled it until it glowed like polished obsidian. Her hair was pulled back into a sophisticated braided chignon, held in place by a bignot, a traditional jade and gold hairpin that Madame Cho had taken from her own collection. When Bertha stepped out of the dressing room, Seung-hyun's breath hitched. He forgot he was a president. He forgot he was a politician. He was just a man looking at a miracle. The deep purple silk of the joggery jacket contrasted magnificently with the richness of her neck and shoulders. The gold embroidery along the hem caught the light with every step. She didn't look like an auntie. She looked like a conqueror. Bertha, Seung-hyun whispered, walking toward her. I feel like a parade float, she joked, but her eyes were shimmering with a new kind of confidence. She looked in the mirror and didn't see a relic. She saw a woman who could stand beside a king. No, Seung-hyun said, taking her hand and kissing the knuckles. You look like the reason I won. Madame Cho stood in the corner, nodding. Now, the old woman said, go out there and show them that Korea is ready for a queen who isn't made of porcelain. 48 hours later. The safe house ballroom was a sea of polished mahogany and the sharp, rhythmic clack of Madame Cho's cane. Again, the old woman commanded. Bertha stood in the center of the room, her feet aching in the stiff, new traditional shoes. Her customized purple silk hanbok hissed with every movement. Beside her, Seung-hyun stood with his hands behind his back, his face a mask of focus, though his eyes danced with silent encouragement. The Kyun-jol, the deep bow, is not a squat, Miss Brown, Madame Cho barked. It is a surrender of the ego. Your hands must be at eye level, Right hand over left. You descend like a falling leaf, not a collapsing building. Bertha let out a long, heavy sigh that sounded like Savannah wind. Madame, I have knees that are 50 years old and a spirit that hasn't surrendered since the Nixon administration. My body just doesn't bend this way. The body follows the heart, the old woman countered. Again! Bertha raised her hands, palms flat, right over left as instructed. She began the slow descent to her knees, but the heavy silk of the chima, skirt, tangled between her ankles. She wobbled, her balance tipping dangerously forward. Before she could hit the floor, a pair of strong, familiar arms caught her by the waist. Shungyun pulled her upright, his chest solid against her back. I've got you, he whispered near her ear. You're supposed to be practicing your own posture, Mr. President, Bertha grumbled, though she leaned into him for a second longer than necessary. My posture is fine, he teased, stepping around to face her. He took her hands in his, ignoring Madame Cho's disapproving tut. Look at me, Bertha. Don't look at the floor. Don't look at the history of the Joseon dynasty. Just look at the guy who owes you a sandwich. He began to sink down, his movements fluid and practiced, but he kept his eyes locked on hers. He guided her down with him, his hands never letting go of hers. One knee, he murmured, now the other. Lean forward, but keep your heart open. As they both knelt on the silk rug, the protocol fell away. For a moment, it wasn't a lesson. It was a prayer. Bertha felt the weight of the moment, the sheer impossibility of where she was. She looked at Sung-hyun, the future of a nation, kneeling on the floor with the woman the world said didn't belong there. Tears pricked her eyes. I'm going to mess this up, Sung-hyun. I'm going to trip at the inauguration. I'm going to say the wrong thing to a duchess. I'm going to embarrass you. Sung-hyun reached out and cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. Let them be embarrassed by us then. If you trip, I'll be the one to catch you. If you say the wrong thing, I'll tell them it's the new national policy. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gesture of such deep, quiet reverence that even Madame Cho went silent. You aren't here to fit into their box, Bertha, he whispered. You're here because without you, the box is empty. Bertha took a shaky breath and nodded. She stood up, with his help, and squared her shoulders. She looked at Madame Cho, who was surprisingly wiping her own eyes with a silk handkerchief. Again, Bertha said, her voice firm, and this time make it the deep one. I've got a president to keep on his toes. A few days later, the meeting didn't take place in the Blue House, but in the ancestral home of the Kang family, a place of sliding paper doors, ancient bonsai trees, and a silence that had lasted for generations. Chairman Kang Sr. sat on a silk cushion, his face a map of stern lines. He was the man who had built an empire, and he expected his son to rule the nation. Beside him sat Sung-hyun's mother, a woman whose elegance was as sharp as a diamond. You have brought a storm into this house, Sung-hyun, the chairman said, his voice a low vibration. The party is in chaos. The shares of our companies are fluctuating, all for a woman who does not speak our language. Sung-hyun sat across from them, Bertha's $2 luck bracelet visible beneath his cuff. She speaks the language of the heart, Father, something this house forgot a long time ago. Before the chairman could erupt, the door slid open. Bertha stepped in. She wasn't wearing the royal purple. She was wearing a simple, elegant cream-colored dress. She carried a small tray with a single teapot. I didn't ask for tea, the chairman snapped. I didn't bring it because you asked, Bertha said, her voice steady and warm. She sat down, perfectly, as Madame Cho had taught her, and poured a cup. I brought it because you've been shouting for 20 minutes, and a man your age shouldn't have his blood pressure that high over a woman from Georgia. The mother gasped, but the chairman was silenced by the sheer, unbothered audacity of Bertha's tone. You look at me and see a liability, Bertha continued, looking the old man in the eye. But have you looked at your son? Really looked at him? Bertha reached out and touched Shunhyun's hand. All his life, you've treated him like a crown prince. You fed him ambition and expected him to be a statue. But statues don't breathe, and they don't lead people. They just stand still until they crack. She looked back at the parents. Since he met me, he sleeps, he laughs, he eats. He's not a prince anymore. He's a man. And a man who is at peace with himself is a man who can lead a nation without breaking it. The chairman looked at Shunhyun. He saw the way his son's shoulders were relaxed. He saw the light in his eyes that hadn't been there since he was a child. He saw that Shunhyun wasn't leaning on Bertha out of weakness, but out of a newfound strength. The mother was the first to move. She reached out and took the cup of tea Bertha had poured. She took a sip and looked at her husband. She is right, husband, the mother whispered. We raised a leader, but we nearly killed a son. If this woman is the reason he finally smiles, then perhaps the optics don't matter as much as the peace. The chairman stayed silent for a long minute. Then he let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a man letting go of a burden. He picked up his own cup. The tea is acceptable, the chairman grumbled, which in the Kang family was equivalent to a standing ovation. But you will need to learn the proper way to pour the green tea for the Lunar New Year, Ms. Brown. We have a reputation to uphold. Bertha smiled, a wide southern beam. Chairman, you teach me the tea, and I'll teach you how to make the best fried chicken in the Northern Hemisphere. Deal? The chairman's lip twitched, the closest he had come to a smile in a decade. Deal. The chandelier-lit dining hall felt less like a ballroom and more like a meat locker. The air was thick with the scent of braised short ribs and the suffocating chill of a failing trade deal. Across the long mahogany table sat the Western delegation, 6 men in gray suits who spoke in the clipped, data-driven tones of people who viewed the world as a giant spreadsheet. Opposite them, Shunhyun and his advisors were frozen in a deadlock of polite robotic agreements to disagree. Shunhyun's jaw was tight. His left hand was under the table, his thumb obsessively rubbing the indigo $2 bracelet. The deal, a critical agreement for green energy infrastructure, was dying. The Westerners didn't trust the new administration, and the Korean diplomats were too terrified of losing face to speak the truth. Bertha sat close to Shunhyun at the table, a vision in her deep purple silk, but she felt like a ghost. No one had spoken to her. The Westerners had ignored her, assuming she was a diversity hire for the optics of the new president. The technical specifications for the solar grid are non-negotiable, Mr. President. The lead Western negotiator, a man named Henderson, said with a voice as dry as sand. Unless your infrastructure can guarantee a 15% efficiency increase by Q3, we are withdrawing our investment. Shunhyun started to respond with a rehearsed political platitude, but Bertha saw the way he faltered. He was drowning in robotic protocol again. Suddenly, Bertha reached out and picked up a heavy silver spoon. She didn't tap her glass. She dropped it. Clang! The sound echoed through the silent, icy room. All heads turned. Mr. Henderson, Bertha said, her southern drawl cutting through the tension like a warm blade through butter. I've been sitting here for 40 minutes listening to you talk about Q3 efficiency and solar grids, and I gotta say, you look like a man who's about to have a stroke. The room gasped. Shunhyun's advisor, Mr. Park, turned a shade of gray that matched his suit. Bertha, Shunhyun whispered, half warning, half hopeful. No. Let me talk, Bertha said, leaning forward and ignoring the protocol entirely. She looked Henderson in the eye. You haven't touched your food. You've been checking your watch every 3 minutes. And if I'm not mistaken, you've got a picture of a little girl in your breast pocket. I saw it when you reached for your pen. She's about 6? Losing her front teeth? Henderson blinked, his robotic facade flickering. My daughter. Yes. What does that have to do with... It means you're human, Bertha interrupted. And being human means you're scared. You're scared that if you sign this deal and it fails, you won't be able to provide for that little girl. And Sung-Yun here is scared that if he doesn't sign it, he's failing his country. She stood up, walking around the table. The Secret Service agents twitched, but Sung-Yun raised a hand to stay them. She stopped behind Henderson and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a gesture of such normal warmth that the man looked like he might actually cry. We aren't talking about grids, Mr. Henderson. We're talking about trust. Now, are we going to sit here and pretend we're computers? Or are we going to eat this beautiful dinner and talk about how we can make sure your daughter and the children of this country have a world that isn't burning? The silence that followed was different. The robotic chill was gone, replaced by a sudden, heavy reality. Henderson looked up at Bertha, then at Sung-Yun. The rib is actually quite good, Henderson whispered, his voice finally cracking. But the salt content is... I have high blood pressure. Well, why didn't you say so? Bertha barked a laugh. Chef, bring this man the low-sodium broth and some ginger tea. We have a deal to save. Sung-Yun looked at Bertha, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it eclipsed his presidency. She hadn't used a policy brief. She had used a cup of tea. The ice didn't just melt. It shattered. The morning headlines were no longer shouting about scandals. They were whispering about a miracle. The trade deal, which had been dead in the water, was suddenly alive, and it wasn't because of a new tariff agreement. It was because Bertha Brown had treated a billionaire like a person. But the real test wasn't the boardroom. It was the Blue House Garden Party, a high-stakes gathering of international dignitaries and their spouses. Bertha stood on the manicured lawn, her beautiful, elegant outfit catching the afternoon sun. She watched as the elite of Seoul and the world moved in stiff, choreographed circles. Among them was Lady Genevieve, the wife of the French ambassador. The woman was a legend of elegance, but today she looked like a statue carved from ice. She hadn't touched her champagne, and she hadn't spoken a word. The other diplomats' wives whispered behind their fans, "She is cold. She thinks she is above us. So arrogant." Bertha, however, saw something different. She saw the way Genevieve's eyes darted toward the flower beds, then glazed over with a hollow, haunted look. It was the look Bertha had seen in her own mirror after she lost her mother. It wasn't arrogance. It was a ghost. Ignoring the frantic signals from the protocol officers, Bertha broke away from Sung-Yun's side. She didn't wait to be introduced. She walked straight up to Genevieve and stood beside her, looking at the white roses. "They're beautiful," Bertha said softly, "but they don't smell like much, do they? Too much breeding, not enough soul." Genevieve stiffened, her voice a fragile porcelain. "They are perfectly manicured, Miss Brown." "Manicured is just another word for hiding the mess," Bertha replied. She turned to face the woman, her voice dropping to a low maternal hum. "I heard about your mother, Genevieve. I'm so sorry. The world doesn't stop for a broken heart, does it? It just expects you to put on a dress and stand in a garden." The Frenchwoman's mask didn't just crack. It dissolved. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears she had been holding back for months. The robotic diplomat's wife began to tremble. Instead of calling for a medic or a Secret Service agent, Bertha did the unthinkable. She reached out and pulled the ambassador's wife into a fierce, grounding hug. The garden went silent. Gasps echoed across the lawn. A black woman, the unconfirmed partner of the president, was holding the French elite in a public embrace. It violated every rule of Korean Kemyeon. Saving face. "Let it out, sugar," Bertha whispered. "The flowers won't tell anyone." Genevieve sobbed into Bertha's shoulder, the coldness melting out of her. For 5 minutes, the place wasn't a political stage. It was a sanctuary. When they finally pulled apart, Genevieve's face was red, but her eyes were clear. She took Bertha's hands. "They told me you were difficult," Genevieve whispered in accented English, "but you are the only person in this city who has seen me since the funeral." That evening, the French ambassador, who had been a primary holdout on the trade deal, walked up to Xungyun. He didn't talk about percentages. "Mr. President," the ambassador said, looking over at Bertha, who was now laughing with the kitchen staff, "your partner has a rare gift. She brings Zhong deep affection to a room that has been cold for far too long. If your administration is built on the heart she possesses, then France is honored to be your partner." He signed the document right there, on a cocktail table, using a cheap pen. The Bertha effect was born. The media cameras caught the hug, and by sunset the internet was flipping. Netizen comment, "I thought she was a relic, but she's actually a healer." Headline, "The First Lady of Warmth, How Bertha Brown is Winning the World." Xungyun watched her from across the lawn, his heart full. He realized that while he was trying to teach her how to be a Korean queen, she was busy teaching the nation how to be human again. The atmosphere in Seoul had shifted from celebratory to predatory. The Bertha effect had made the opposition party desperate. They didn't just want to defeat Xungyun, they wanted to disqualify his heart. Bertha was in the private residence, practicing her Korean calligraphy when the television flickered to a breaking news special. Her brush slipped, leaving a jagged ink blot on the rice paper as a familiar, smug face filled the screen. It was Edward. He was standing in front of a phalanx of microphones at the Incheon Airport Arrivals Hall, flanked by the lead strategist of the opposition party. He looked exactly as he had in Savannah, polished, condescending, and wearing the smile of a man who knew he was about to get paid. "I'm just here for the truth," Edward told the shouting reporters, his voice translate into a sharp Korean voiceover. "Bertha is a woman who knows how to climb. She left me at the altar when she realized I couldn't give her a presidential lifestyle. She's not a healer. She's a strategist who saw an overworked man and pounced." The Chiron at the bottom read, "The Savannah Expose. Is the First Lady a gold digger?" The walls suddenly felt like they were made of glass. Bertha sat on the floor, the ink staining her fingers, as the 3 layers of rejection returned with a vengeance. The internet, which had just begun to love her, flipped overnight. The anti-comments were replaced by something more sinister: gold digger, foreign opportunist, and the scammer from the South. A knock at the door startled her. It wasn't Xungyun. It was Chairman Park and the elders. They didn't bow this time. "He is in the country, Miss Brown," Park said, his voice cold as a winter grave. "The opposition has scheduled a televised town hall tonight. He plans to show proof. Emails, bank statements, the works. Even if it's all lies, the stench will never leave the president's suit." "It is lies," Bertha whispered, her voice shaking. "He cheated on me. I left him." "It doesn't matter," Park snapped. "In politics, the first story told is the only one people remember. You are a shadow over the inauguration. If you love the president, you will leave tonight. We have a private jet waiting. No grounding orders this time." Bertha was halfway to closing her suitcase when the door swung open. Xungyun didn't look like a man in retreat. He looked like a man who had just declared war. "Put the bag down, Bertha," he commanded. "Xungyun, he's going to destroy you. He has proof." "He has a script written by a dying political party," Xungyun countered. He walked over and took her hands, his eyes blazing. "I am the president of the most technologically advanced nation on Earth. Did they really think I wouldn't do my own consulting?" The air in the safe house was thick with the scent of ozone and iron. The Savannah scandal had reached a fever pitch, and the opposition was already calling for an impeachment inquiry based on Xungyun's moral failures in choosing a partner. Seung-yeon sat in the Situation Room, but he wasn't looking at troop movements or economic tickers. He was staring at a screen showing Edward, Bertha's past, sipping a cocktail at a 5-star hotel in Gangnam, preparing for a primetime interview that would bury Bertha's reputation forever. "Sir," Director Choi whispered, stepping into the dim light, "we have the forensic audit from the Georgia authorities. It's worse than we thought. He didn't just cheat on her, he embezzled from the joint business account she built to pay for his wedding. He's been running a Ponzi scheme under the guise of his law firm for 3 years. Seung-hyun's eyes narrowed. He came to my country to call the woman I love a gold digger while he was stealing bread from her table? The opposition party has paid his legal retainers to keep those charges quiet in the U.S., Choi added. They think they are untouchable. Seung-hyun stood up, adjusting his sleeves to reveal the $2 indigo bracelet. They forgot one thing. I don't just lead this country. I am the law of this land for the next 4 years. If they want a show, let's give them a premiere they'll never forget. The opposition's town hall was set to begin at 8 p.m. The cameras were rolling, and Edward was adjusting his tie, ready to tell a captivated nation about the manipulative older woman who broke his heart. Suddenly, every screen in South Korea, from the giant monitors in Myeongdong to the smallest smartphones, glitched. The emergency presidential broadcast signal overrode the feed. Seung-hyun didn't appear in a suit behind a mahogany desk. He appeared in the cybersecurity hub of the National Intelligence Service, surrounded by glowing blue screens. People of Korea, Seung-hyun began, his voice like rolling thunder. A guest has come to our shores claiming to offer the truth. But in this digital age, the truth doesn't wear a tie. It wears a trail of data. He gestured to the screen behind him. This, Seung-hyun pointed to a flickering red line, is the $500,000 the opposition party paid Mr. Edward Sterling to lie to you tonight. And this, he pointed to a second set of documents, is the indictment filed 1 hour ago in the state of Georgia for grand larceny. Mr. Sterling isn't a victim. He is a fugitive. The camera cut to a live feed of the hotel lobby. The audience watched in stunned silence as the Korean National Police, coordinated with Interpol, marched into the VIP lounge. Edward didn't look like a smug lawyer anymore. He looked like a cornered rat. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he screamed, "Bertha is nothing! She's just a relic!" The camera panned back to Seung-hyun. He was looking directly into the lens, as if he were looking into the homes of every citizen. "You call her a relic," Seung-hyun said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate level. "I call her my conscience. You call her a foreigner. I call her the only person who was brave enough to tell me the truth when I was surrounded by liars like you. If you attack her honor, you are attacking the presidency itself. And as you can see, I protect what is mine." Inside the safe house, Bertha watched the broadcast from the shadows of the hallway. She saw Seung-hyun, the man she thought was a powerless manager, use the full weight of a sovereign nation to wash the mud off her name. He didn't hide the scandal. He incinerated it. Hours later, when Seung-hyun walked back into the residence, he found her waiting. She didn't thank him. She walked up to him and gripped the lapels of his jacket, her eyes wet with a mixture of relief and awe. "You just started a war with your own parliament for me," she whispered. "They're going to hate you for this." "Let them," Seung-hyun said, pulling her into his arms. "I spent my whole life being careful. I'm done being careful, Bertha. I'd rather be a king for a day with you than a president for a decade without you." But as they held each other, the red light on Seung-hyun's secure phone began to flash. The party elders were calling. The ultimatum was coming. The victory over the scandal was brief. By the next morning, the war room was filled with a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. The party elders, led by the stone-faced Chairman Park, were no longer making requests. They were issuing a decree. The mahogany table in the Situation Room was littered with polling data and optics reports. Chairman Park stood at the head, his hands resting on the table like a judge. "You have won a battle, Shungyun-ah, but you are losing the war," Park said, his voice flat and final. "The people love a hero, but they do not trust a king who puts a foreign woman above the stability of the republic. The National Assembly is moving to block your every cabinet appointment. Your presidency is dead before the inauguration." Shungyun stood by the window, his back to them. He looked out at the city he was supposed to lead. "And what is your cure for this death?" "A political marriage," Park stated. "The daughter of the Shinsegai conglomerate. She is young, she is pure Korean blood, and her family support will guarantee your legislative majority. You announce the engagement tonight. Bertha Brown is given a diplomatic special advisor title and quietly relocated to a villa in Jeju. Or she returns to America." Shungyun turned, his eyes icy. "And if I refuse?" "Then we will trigger an emergency party vote. We will declare you mentally unfit due to excessive emotional strain from the campaign. You will be a president without a party, without a cabinet, and without a country. Choose the presidency or the woman. You have until the press conference at 8 p.m. Hours later, Shungyun found Bertha in the small kitchen of the safe house. She wasn't wearing the royal purple silk today. She was in her old, comfortable cardigan, stirring a pot of simple chicken soup. He didn't have to say a word. She saw it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way he looked at the $2 luck bracelet on his wrist like it was a shackle. "They gave you the crown or the girl's speech, didn't they?" Bertha asked softly, not looking up from the pot. "I won't do it, Bertha. I'll burn the whole party to the ground." "And then what, Shungyun?" She turned, her eyes full of a heartbreaking wisdom. "You'll be a king of ashes. You promised the people a future. You promised them truth. You can't do that if you're fighting your own shadow every day." She walked over and took his face in her hands. "I am a 50-year-old woman. I've lived a whole life. I don't need a title. But this country, they need a leader who isn't broken. If I'm the thing that breaks you, then I'm not your sanctuary anymore. I'm your cage." "You are my life," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Then live," she said, a single tear escaping, "even if it's without me." 8 p.m. arrived. The world was watching. The journalists sat with pens poised, expecting the announcement of the strategic alliance with the Shinsegai heiress. Chairman Park stood in the wings, a smug smile on his face. Shungyun walked to the podium. He looked tired. He looked like the man from the roof garden. "I was told today that a leader must choose between his heart and his duty," Shungyun began. The room went silent. "I was told that to lead Korea, I must be a man of stone, a man without a personal life, a man who marries for optics rather than love." He paused, his hand moving to the indigo bracelet. "But I believe that a man who lies to his own heart cannot be trusted with the heart of a nation. You voted for me because I promised a new era of truth. The truth is, I am only standing here because of one woman. She is not a strategic asset. She is my strength." Bertha, watching from the doorway, felt her breath catch. "If the price of this presidency is to betray the woman who saved my soul, then the price is too high," Shungyun declared, his voice rising with a terrifying power. "I will not announce an engagement to a stranger. I will announce a new standard for leadership. If you want a president who is a puppet, find another man. But if you want a man who knows the value of a promise, then look at me." He stepped away from the podium and walked straight toward the wings. He didn't look at Chairman Park. He walked straight to Bertha, took her hand and led her, not to a villa in Jeju, but out onto the main stage in front of the flashing lights. The silence of the room was shattered by a single, lone clap from the back. Madame Cho, the stylist, standing with her jade cane. then another. Then the roar of the press began. He hadn't chosen the crown or the girl. He had dared the country to let him have both. The aftermath of the press conference felt like the eye of a hurricane. While the public was divided and the political world was in a state of tectonic shifting, Bertha sat in the quiet of the presidential suite. She watched the moon over Seoul, the same moon she had watched from the roof garden, but everything had changed. She saw the protesters gathered at the gates, half of them holding signs of support, the other half calling for Seung-hyun's resignation. She saw the news reports detailing the currency crash caused by political uncertainty. "He's choosing me over the world," she whispered, her heart heavy with a love that felt like a burden. "And the world is going to burn him for it." Bertha didn't pack her silk handbox. She didn't take the jewelry or the jade pins. She put on her old travel coat, the one that smelled of Georgia rain, and sat at the mahogany desk. She didn't use the expensive stationery. She used a scrap of paper from her old notebook. "Seung-hyun, I've spent 50 years learning that love isn't just about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go so the other person can fly. You think you need me to be strong, but you were already that man. I just reminded you. A king needs a kingdom, Seung-hyun. He needs his people to trust him. And right now, I am the wall between you and them. I won't be the reason your dream dies. I'm going back to where the air is a little easier to breathe. Don't look for me. Rule for them. Bertha." She knew the front gates were a fortress, but she also knew the gray zone. She had memorized the service routes the kitchen staff used. At 3 a.m., Bertha slipped out through the loading docks, her head covered by a simple scarf. She didn't call for a car. She walked until her feet ached, eventually flagging down a standard silver taxi. "Incheon Airport," she told the driver, her voice thick, "and please, drive fast." As the taxi sped away, she looked back at the safe house. It sat on the hill like a crown made of light. She felt a phantom tug on her wrist, as if the $2 luck bracelet she'd given him was a tether she was finally snapping. 2 hours later, Seung-hyun entered the suite. He was carrying a single yellow rose, a normal guy gesture he'd planned for their breakfast. He found the room empty. He found the bed made. And then he found the note. As he read the words, his hand began to shake. The presidential composure he had fought so hard to maintain shattered. He didn't call his advisors. He didn't call the party. He pressed the button for the direct line to national security. "Sir?" Director Choi's voice crackled through the speaker. "The morning briefing is in 10 minutes. "Cancel it," Seung-hyun said, his voice dropping into a register of cold, absolute authority. "Sir, the markets are opening. We need to address the—" "I don't care about the markets," Seung-hyun roared. "Bertha is gone. She's heading for the airport." "Sir, you cannot interfere with a private citizen's travel again. The optics would be—" "This isn't about optics, Choi. This is about the soul of this administration." Seung-hyun stood up, grabbing his coat. "Track her passport. Find the taxi. And Choi, tell the air traffic control towers to stand by. I am not losing her." The morning mist clung to the Incheon harbor, smelling of salt and diesel. Bertha stood by the railing of a ferry, her suitcase at her feet, watching the mainland of Korea begin to dissolve into the gray haze. She had switched from the airport to the sea at the last minute, a final attempt to slip through the cracks of a world that had become too loud. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here," a voice said. She didn't turn around. "I just need a moment of peace before I'm gone." "You don't get peace, Bertha. Not without me." Bertha's heart stopped. She turned slowly. Seung-hyun stood there, but he wasn't the normal guy in the rumpled suit. He was wearing the full weight of his office. Behind him, 3 black helicopters hovered over the water like dragonflies, and the deck of the ferry was swarming with men in earpieces. "Why can't you just let me be a ghost?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Because a man doesn't let his soul walk onto a boat and sail away," he said. He walked to her, his shoes clicking on the metal deck, and grabbed her hand. It wasn't a gentle plea this time. It was an act of possession. You said a king needs a kingdom. You're right. But a kingdom without a heart is just a graveyard. Come with me. Where? To tell them the truth. He didn't take her back to the villa. He took her to the heart of the crisis. A temporary podium had been erected right there on the pier, backed by the churning sea and the gray sky. Hundreds of reporters, tipped off by the sudden movement of the presidential motorcade, were already there, their cameras buzzing like angry hornets. The party elders stood in the front row, their faces purple with rage. Chairman Park stepped forward as Seung-hyun led Bertha toward the microphones. This is political suicide, Seung-hyun. Turn back now, and we can still claim she was a guest of the state. Seung-hyun ignored him. He stepped up to the podium and pulled Bertha to his side. He didn't let go of her hand. For the last hour you have been asking where your president went, Seung-hyun began, his voice amplified by the speakers until it shook the very pier they stood on. You have been debating whether a woman from Georgia, a woman of 50 years, a woman who does not fit our tradition, is worthy of this country. The crowd went silent. The only sound was the wind and the shutters of the cameras. I have spent my life doing what was fitting, Seung-hyun said, looking directly into the main lens. I have played the part. I have worn the mask, and I was empty. I was a man dying of thirst in a palace of gold. This woman, Bertha Brown, didn't know who I was. She saw a man who was tired, and she gave me her own bread. He raised their joined hands. The elders say she is a stain on the administration. I say she is the only thing that makes this administration clean. You voted for a man who promised to lead with truth. This is my truth. I love her. I'm only strong enough to face you because she stands beside me. He paused, his eyes hardening as he looked at the party leaders. If the nation rejects her because of her skin, or her age, or her past, then you are rejecting the very future I promised to build. You are rejecting a world where a person is seen for their heart rather than their pedigree. So here is my ultimatum to you, the people of Korea. If you reject her, you reject me. If she is not your first lady, I am not your president. The silence that followed was tectonic. It was a power fantasy come to life, a world leader holding the entire nation hostage for the sake of a woman the world had called a relic. Bertha looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror and a love so profound it hurt to breathe. She realized then that he wasn't choosing her over his duty. He was making her the foundation of it. Then, from the back of the crowd, a young woman, a college student holding a protest sign, slowly lowered it. She started to clap. Then an old man, a fisherman from the docks, joined in. Within seconds, the pier erupted into a roar that drowned out the wind. Seung-hyun didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Bertha. I told you I was a disaster, he whispered. The best one I ever met, she replied. Seung-hyun led her away from the microphones. The Secret Service moves to open the door of the armored SUV, but he waves them off. He stops her right at the water's edge, the Incheon Bridge arching behind them like a silver spine against the gray sky. Bertha, he says, his voice thick with emotion, I've spent my life following a map drawn by other people. I don't want to walk another step unless you're the one holding the compass. He doesn't have a $100,000 diamond ring. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a simple, worn gold band. His grandmother's ring, hidden away for a woman who didn't exist until he met her on the roof. I can't promise you a quiet life, he says, dropping to one knee. Not as a president, but as the man she saved. But I can promise you that you will never be a relic again. You are my future. Bertha Brown, will you marry me and lead this country by my side? Bertha looks at the ring, then at the millions of people watching on their phones. and finally at him. She laughs through her tears, a sound of pure, defiant joy. Xungyun, you're still a reckless fool, she whispers. But yes, 1,000 times, yes. As Xungyun slides the ring onto her finger on the pier, the live viewers hit a record-breaking 50 million concurrent streams. The montage begins with a rapid-fire sequence of screens across the globe. Times Square, New York. The news ticker stops its scrolling stock prices to show the image of Xungyun on one knee. A group of office workers stops in their tracks, cheering. A university in Seoul. Students who were previously protesting are now huddled around a single laptop, screaming in joy. One girl rips up her "Step Down" sign and starts writing, "Long live the Queen" on the back. Savannah, Georgia. A group of women at a local diner. Bertha's old friends burst into tears, hugging each other. "That's our Bertha," one cries. "She's the First Lady of Korea." The same forums that were toxic hours ago are now flooded with a wave of Jong, our deep affection. At K-Drama Realist, I thought this was a scandal, but it's a revolution. He chose a woman with a soul over a woman with a resume. I'm standing our new First Lady. At Seoul Fashionista, did you see her face? No filters, no whitening, just pure light. Madame Cho was right. She's a mountain. We've been looking for beauty in the wrong places. At History, Buff 99, the president grounded the air and the sea to keep his heart. This is the most romantic thing in 5,000 years of Korean history. Within 2 hours. The Luck Bracelet. The $2 indigo and gold string bracelet sells out globally. It becomes a symbol of finding your worth and true luck. The Purple Hanbok. Thousands of orders pour in for deep purple silk. The color becomes a trend for women over 40. Reclaimed as a symbol of power and royal aura. The morning of the inauguration broke over Seoul like a polished diamond, clear, cold, and brilliant. For 60 days, the nation had been a pressure cooker of rumors, scandals, and anticipation. Today, the 60-day war was over. The threshold. Inside the private residence, Xungyun stood before a mirror, his hands frozen on his silk tie. He looked every bit the president, sharp, imposing, and distant. But his reflection showed a man whose heart was racing against his ribs. A hand reached into the frame, steady and warm. Bertha stepped up behind him. She was a vision in an outfit designed not to blend in, but to command. Her hair was swept up, held by a single jade pin Xungyun had given her the night before. "You're holding your breath again," she whispered, her reflection meeting his. Xungyun exhaled, turning in her arms. "I'm terrified, Bertha. I'm about to swear an oath to 50 million people. What if I'm not the man they think I am?" Bertha smoothed the lapels of his coat. "You aren't the man they think you are. You're better. Because you're the only one in that plaza who knows that power isn't a throne. It's a responsibility to keep people safe. Now, tuck that chin up. You've got a country to lead." The motorcade arrived at the National Assembly Plaza to a roar that shook the windows of the surrounding skyscrapers. 21 cannons fired in a rhythmic thunder, signaling the arrival of the new era. As the door of the armored limousine opened, the world's cameras zoomed in. Protocol dictated the president-elect walk alone, followed by his transition team. Xungyun ignored the protocol officer's frantic signaling. He reached back into the car, his hand open and waiting. Bertha took it. As they stepped onto the red carpet together, a momentary hush fell over the crowd, followed by a wave of cheering that was louder than the cannons. The auntie from Georgia and the vampire of Seoul walked side by side. Every step was a defiance of the status quo. The elders in the front row stood stiffly, forced to witness the woman they tried to exile lead the way into the palace. Hyun stood at the podium, his hand resting on the Constitution. Bertha stood exactly 3 paces behind him, the position of the First Lady. "I do solemnly swear." His voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by 100 speakers. As he raised his right hand, the sleeve of his custom suit shifted just enough. For a fleeting second, the high-definition broadcast caught a flash of indigo and gold string tied around his wrist. The $2 luck bracelet. The internet exploded. The luck of the people was sitting right there on the president's arm. When it was time for his address, Hyun looked past the teleprompters. He looked at the sea of faces, and then he looked at Bertha. "Many have said that a leader must be a man of iron," Hyun said, his voice dropping into that intimate, grounded tone, "but iron breaks under pressure. To lead a nation, one must be made of hope. I found that hope in the most unlikely of places, in a quiet conversation on a dark roof, with a woman who reminded me that before I am a president, I am a man." He turned slightly toward her, a small, private smile breaking his professional mask. "To the woman who became my sanctuary when the world was a storm, I promise the people of Korea that I will lead with the same truth and warmth you gave to me. Today, we don't just inaugurate a president, we inaugurate a new kind of heart for this republic." The ceremony ended with a blizzard of confetti and the national anthem. As the motorcade pulled through the grand gates of the Blue House, the heavy steel doors shut behind them. The moment they stepped into the grand marble foyer, the entire staff, hundreds of guards, chefs, and secretaries, bowed in a synchronized wave of respect. "Welcome home, Mr. President. Welcome home, Madam," the chief of staff intoned. Hyun waited until they reached the privacy of their suite. The door slid shut, and the president vanished. He slumped against the wood paneling, grabbing Bertha's hand and kissing her knuckles fervently. "We did it," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "We're inside the walls, Bertha. They can't vote you out now." Bertha looked at the gold ring on her finger, then up at the man who had moved heaven and earth to keep her by his side. "Then I guess we better get to work, Mr. President. We've got a wedding to plan and a country to fix." The wedding of the century. 6 months later. The Gyeongbokgung Palace courtyard was a sea of history and hope. The ancient stone pillars are draped in white silk and gold thread. It is a crisp spring morning, and the air is filled with the scent of plum blossoms and the distant joyous hum of the thousands gathered outside the palace walls. As the massive wooden doors swing open, a hush falls over the international dignitaries. Bertha appears, a vision of cross-cultural elegance. She wears a fusion masterpiece, a traditional white silk wedding gown with the structured high-collared silhouette of a royal hanbok. The long, flowing skirt is hand-embroidered with a delicate trail of Georgia peaches and Korean plum blossoms intertwined, a symbol of 2 lives grafted together. Hyun has turned protocol on its head. In the front row, sitting directly next to the French ambassador and the President of the United States, is the elderly shopkeeper from the Noodle Diner and the young clerk from the GS25 convenience store. They are dressed in their finest clothes, weeping openly as they watch the roof garden lady walk toward the throne. As Bertha walks down the long aisle of the courtyard, the traditional silence of a royal ceremony is broken. The crowd isn't just watching, they are cheering. The anti-slurs have been erased from the national consciousness. Children lining the path hold hand-painted signs in English and Korean, "Our First Lady," and "Luck be with you." She reaches the altar, and Hyun takes her hands. He ignores the teleprompter and the prepared script. Hyun, speaking in English, his voice echoing for her family. "I was a king who was lost in a palace of my own making. I was a man who forgot how to breathe until I found a sanctuary in a roof garden. You were the one who found me, Bertha. You taught me that a crown is heavy, but love is light." Bertha, responding in perfect, fluent Korean, Her voice steady and resonant. I came to this city to disappear, to be a relic of a life that felt over. Thank you for not letting me hide. Thank you for making the world see me, and for showing me that it is never too late to start a revolution of the heart. The presidential residence was a fortress, but inside their bedroom, Seung-yoon had ordered every light turned off except for a few low candles. The grand, king-sized bed felt like an island in a dark sea. Bertha stood by the window, but she wasn't looking at the view. She was struggling with the intricate silk ties of the wedding hanbok. Her fingers, usually so steady, were trembling. She felt a presence behind her. Seung-yoon didn't say a word. He simply placed his hands on her shoulders. His touch was warm, heavy, and grounded. Through the reflection in the dark glass, she saw him. Not the president who had stood at the podium, but the man who had looked at her in a rain-slicked roof garden and realized he was no longer alone. "Let me," he whispered. He began to untie the silk ribbons of her joggery. One by one, the layers of the First Lady fell away. He worked with a slow, reverent focus, his knuckles occasionally brushing against the back of her neck. As the heavy silk slipped to the floor, Bertha felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She turned around to face him. He had already discarded his jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, looking human and rumpled. He didn't reach for her body first. He reached for her face. He cupped her cheeks in his palms, his thumbs tracing the lines around her eyes, the lines he had once called her history. "I spent today terrified," he confessed, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "Every time the cameras flashed, I thought you were going to vanish. I thought I was going to turn around and find a ghost." Bertha took his hands and pulled them down, pressing his palms against her heart. "Feel that, Seung-yoon. That's not a ghost. That's a woman who isn't going anywhere. You grounded the planes, you fought the elders, and you showed me off to the world. I'm stuck with you, you reckless man." He let out a jagged, broken laugh and pulled her into him. This wasn't the ceremonial hug from the pier. This was desperate and deep. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her, the cocoa butter, and the faint, lingering smell of the incense from the ceremony. "I don't have to be him anymore tonight, do I?" he asked into her skin. "No," she whispered, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. "Tonight, there is no republic. There is no blue house. There's just a man and a woman in a room." He picked her up. Not with the practiced grace of a movie star, but with the raw, clumsy urgency of a man who finally had his prize. He laid her back against the pillows, and for the first time in his life, Seung-yoon felt the silence wasn't empty. It was full. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with a devotion that bordered on worship. He didn't see a foreigner or an older woman. He saw the only person who had ever seen him. "You are my peace, Bertha," he murmured, leaning down until their lips were a breath apart. "You are my only home." Bertha pulled him down, closing the final gap between them. "Then come home, Seung-yoon. I've been waiting for you." In the dark, away from the prying eyes of the nation and the weight of the crown, the president finally fell asleep, not because he was exhausted, but because he was safe. The morning of the one-year anniversary of the inauguration didn't begin with a crisis or a scandal. It began with the soft chime of a silver bell in the private quarters of the Blue House. Bertha Brown, now known to the world as the First Lady of Warmth, stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She was no longer the woman in the travel-worn trench coat fleeing through an airport. She wore a custom-designed ceremonial hanbok that had become her signature, a deep, midnight blue silk chima paired with a jacket embroidered with golden magnolias, the flower of perseverance. Her skin glowed, not with the paleness the stylist had once demanded, but with a rich, polished radiance accentuated by gold dust. Her hair was coiled into an elegant crown, woven with traditional jade ornaments and a single small indigo thread. In just 12 months, the relic from Georgia had become the most popular figure in the country. She hadn't done it by learning perfect Korean or mastering political theory. She had done it by walking into orphanages and nursing homes and hugging people until their masks broke. She had turned the cold marble halls of the Blue House into a place that smelled of ginger tea and soul food. The morning's task was a state visit from a high-level African Union delegation. For decades, these meetings had been stiff and unproductive. Bertha didn't sit in the back. She sat at the round table. When the negotiations hit a snag over agricultural tech sharing, she didn't cite a white paper. She told a story about her grandfather's farm in Savannah, about the dirt, the sweat, and the dignity of a harvest. By the end of the lunch, the delegates weren't just signing a treaty. They were laughing, sharing photos of their families with the woman they called Sister Bertha. Seung-hyun watched her from the head of the table, a proud, quiet smile playing on his lips. She wasn't his secret anymore. She was his superpower. As the sun began to set over the granite peaks of Bukhansan Mountain, the official ceremonies ended. The cameras were turned off. The Secret Service detail was told to hold the perimeter at the elevator. Seung-hyun and Bertha climbed the final set of stairs to the restricted roof of the Blue House. There were no marble benches here, no silk cushions. In the center of the roof, tucked behind a high-tech satellite array, sat two weathered blue plastic crates. They were the original crates from the GS-25 convenience store, liberated by the president's security team and kept as the most private relics of the administration. Seung-hyun sat on one, his expensive suit jacket discarded on the gravel. He handed a paper cup to Bertha. "Careful," he whispered, his voice the same tired, warm vibration from the roof garden. "It's battery acid. The machine in the staff lounge is terrible." Bertha sat on her crate, the silk of her royal hanbok bunching around her knees. She took a sip and winced. "It's awful, truly. I think they used old tires for the beans." They both laughed. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the millions of lights of Seoul twinkle below them. The city was a sea of neon, a kingdom that finally felt like it belonged to them. Not because they owned it, but because they had survived it together. Seung-hyun reached over and took her hand. On his wrist, peeking out from a $10,000 shirt, was the original $2 indigo and gold luck bracelet, frayed and faded, but held together by a year of impossible victories. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. "Staying in the storm?" Bertha leaned her head on his shoulder, the smell of the city wind and his cologne filling her lungs. She looked at the plastic crates, then at the man who had grounded the world for her. "Seung-hyun," she said, her southern drawl as sweet as honey. "I've spent 50 years waiting for a seat this good. I wouldn't trade this blue box for the biggest throne in the world." Seung-hyun kissed her temple as the moon rose over the house. The president and the woman, the king and his heart, two normal people, finally home. The end. Thank you for watching. If you love this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional twists and character-driven plots. And if you're ready for the next story, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in love that defies all odds.